There was a young stoner kid in our squad, and he wound up being our point man. He'd walk ahead of the rest of us, chain smoking these big, silver blue joints, puffing out thick clouds of gray smoke ahead of himself. And in the ripples and eddies of smoke, he'd see where it was safe for us to be. The enemy was using spatial displacement techniques. We had no idea how they were doing it. Military intelligence suggested psychic phenomena, but those assholes were always lying to us about everything just to keep us on edge. Feeding us false information just to see what we'd do with it. Rocky, this gearhead we had hauling ammo with us, he told me that he suspected it was long-range teleportation spheres. A week later, while we were taking fire, he stood up straight in the middle of one, lost his whole body up to the waist. They sent his legs and dick back home to be buried, I guess. I don't really see the point myself, but then I don't see the point of most of war. It's just a crazy way to spend a day. But that stoner kid, Stony we called him, he kept us alive back then, if we listened to him. A lot of the hard asses had trouble with that, taking warrior lessons from some drippy little punk with permanent red eye. But the kid understood something we didn't. He was more attuned to that space than any of us ever would be. Don't ask me how. He just breathed more comfortably, both literally and figuratively. That was the spring of '45. We marched across 600 miles of South American jungle. We burned ancient temples to the ground. We discovered small tribes of people who'd never before encountered the outside world, and we executed them. The brass told us, well, they told us what we needed to hear. They told us it was necessary. They told us it was important. They told us they wouldn't let us out of that goddamn jungle until we took out whatever was scrambling all of our attempts to maintain stability in the region. The other side, they were fighting dirty too, and they were proud of it. At least as proud as we were. I lost over a dozen friends to poison arrows. Poison arrows. In this day and age, can you imagine? And it's not like they didn't have the guns. They just liked using the arrows. It was an intimidation technique. They'd hit one of us, and instead of just dying, he'd start frothing at the mouth and screaming, crying for his mother, crying about seeing shapes within shapes, crying about seeing the other side and a dark figure come beckoning for him. It was the same each time. I started to suspect there might be something to it all. I have my own crimes to justify. I don't judge. I don't question. That's not my role. That's not my position. My position is right up front, behind that freak smoking like a chimney, trying to not get blazed on his after trail. But the old man by the caves, that was just too much for me. We'd been out in the jungle for over a week. We were low on rations and even lower on positive mental outlooks. Hell, I'd had to put down one minor mutiny by breaking a man's nose with the butt of my rifle. Not my finest moment, but the others shaped up after that. So we're trekking through the jungle, and Smokey's up front, puffing away, moving just a little faster than a sloth might go, but he's saying it's necessary. There's a lot of them up around here, he says. Pockets within pockets. He'd just say shit like that. It bothered some of the guys. Me, I didn't really mind, just wished he'd make a bit more sense. By this time, the rest of the guys had gotten used to the pace we were moving at. The last guy who complained had been Big Albert McManus, who finally snapped and shoved Smokey aside, only to tumble chest first through a spatial anomaly that separated his head from his waist in neat little segmented strips. It's pretty much impossible to describe. It was impossible to see. His body just bent, like a fractal, an optical illusion, the flesh and bone twisting in on itself, folding into a section of space we couldn't perceive. And then he was gone. Or part of him was gone. Parts of him. Necessary parts. He was dead before what was left of him hit the ground. After that, any complaints anybody had about the speeds we traveled at, they kept to themselves, which was good. The last thing Smokey needed was bad vibes from the back, as he'd say. He had enough going on with what was in front of him. We'd been moving at a snail's pace for just about 6 hours when we came across the cave entrance. Just a shallow little hump of an entry point, barely big enough for a man to walk into, leading into a little hill and then down. Down and down into the dark. One guy lit a flare and threw it in just to see what would happen, and the flare tumbled and tumbled down endless flights of what turned out to be stairs, carved into the dirt. Eventually the darkness swallowed up the flare, and that spooked all the guys pretty good, so we were about to leave when the old man showed up. He came walking out of the jungle, smiling as happily as if he were just walking down Broadway Street with a Starbucks coffee in his hand. He was dressed in an old yellow robe with a frayed rope as a belt. His head was shaved, and he looked like he might be between 100 and 150 years old. He was already smiling, but he smiled even wider when he saw us, revealing a mouth entirely devoid of teeth. It was a wild, careless grin. I don't think he expected us to shoot him. Or maybe he just didn't care. 6 men fired at once, not realizing what Stoney had already seen. There were pockets between us and the old man, and not a single bullet could make it through. Each and every shot that was fired was simply swallowed up and put away into whatever that impossible space happened to be. In response, the old man started laughing at us, and even his laughter was segmented by the invisible traps in the air. The sounds were spliced up and contorted into echoing patterns that made a bunch of us sick to our stomachs. A few guys saw the remnants of their breakfast come back up again. A handful of the others had to sit down or just collapsed onto their knees. The weirdness was too much, and if pressured, a fragile mental state was as likely to crumble. I was thinking all those thoughts as the old man started to move towards us. I don't know if there was something different about his eyes, but it seemed as if he could see where those things were, or rather, where those things weren't. Where things were right and where things were wrong. He danced between those points like they were raindrops, all the while laughing. Laughing at us, laughing at me specifically, but I suspect now that we might have all been thinking that at the time. There was something personal, intimate, about the way that the sound left his lips. You were sure he was just about to say your name. He killed 6 men with his bare hands before we could stop him. I saw it happen, and then I couldn't see it. I had to look away. He pulled one guy through what might as well have been a blender from what it did to him. Another just disappeared, all the way down to his ankles. I guess they could have buried his boots if we'd brought them back with us. It was Stoney who got the shot off, catching the old man in the knee, the shot spinning the old fella around like a top, those ancient bones snapping and crackling like thin bamboo. He just kept laughing, though. even as he bled out onto the ground. I was all set to put another bullet in his heart when Stoney stopped me. I gave the kid a smack and told him to mind himself, but he shouted that if I took the shot, it would be like a bomb going off. He said the old man had one of those things inside him. And that's when I could see it. A flickering around his chest. It wasn't real, but maybe it was. Maybe. It looked like an optical illusion, like you just blinked and seen something wrong for a moment. But the longer I looked, the more real it became. There was like a circle in the center of the old man's chest. And when it blurred or skipped, you could see straight through him, into his body, into his muscles, his bones, his heart, and through them to the ground on the other side. I don't know how they done it to him, or if maybe he'd done it to himself, but the old man had one of those things grafted to his body, surgically implanted, I guess? Or maybe he just dreamed it up, and the dream laid an egg that hatched into that thing. You don't know what it might be. It's all wrong, all that stuff. Everything you think about it is wrong. Military intelligence warn us about that. They say prolonged contact, it screws with the mind's ability to know the difference between ideas and reality. That's what they tell me, but they don't have to go through this stuff. They don't have to live with the memories, the fleeting moments of insight. The old man, seeing I'm not going to shoot him, he stops laughing and he gets this sort of sad look. And then he just falls into himself. Like he evaporates into a single point, and then that point disappears into itself. I was watching him when it happened. It didn't look like fun. I don't think he was happy about it. I don't think I'll ever know what was going on there. With that technology, with those people. I don't think I'd want to, even if somebody who could tell me. It's all devil magic from here, all that crazy swamp science we used to call it. These days they'll lock you up for saying stuff like that. Culturally insensitive, they call it. Sure, and what do you call it when one of your buddies, a guy you trusted with your life for 6 of the worst months of your life, when that guy gets thrown into a hole in the air that turns his chest into a gaping hollow chasm, giving him time to look through himself before he dies? What do you say to him? I said, holy crap, just by accident. And I think he might have almost chuckled once before he went. I still feel bad about that. So the day we got back to base, I said to the corporal, I can't do this anymore. I'm not fit for command. I'm not equipped to perform my job anymore. And he just starts laughing and tells me to get to my bunk because me and my men are going back out in the field bright and early the next day. So I took the corporal's sidearm and I shot myself with it. Twice in the left arm and once in the ribs. Not too bad, but bad enough. They patched me up and threw me in the hole for a few months. I suspect there would have been a trial, but by the time I was healthy enough for it, the military had bigger fish to fry than little old me. They basically just swept it under the rug, said, here's your dishonorable discharge and don't ever ask us for anything again. Am I bitter? I don't know. I mean, most days I'm just glad I'm home. Or at least back in the real world. I don't know if it's home anymore or just where I live. Everything here feels paper thin. Like you could just push through it. Push through the backdrop of existence and find some greater truth hiding behind it all. I wonder if that's what made the old man so sad. Or if maybe that's what made him smile. I have dreams almost every night where I'm still in that place, out by those caves, and that old man's still smiling at me, laughing at me. But at least I can wake up from the dreams. That's what I tell myself, that I'm awake. Sometimes it's hard to tell.